Ever stared at an 8 by 8 grid, those 64 squares, and felt a weird mix of fascination and, well, absolute bewilderment? Like, there's gotta be something there, right? A hidden pattern, a secret shortcut, a way to conquer it all? I mean, 8x8. It's the chessboard, the classic game board, the foundation of so many puzzles, so many challenges. But what is the trick? What's the magic key that unlocks its potential? Because let's be honest, we've all been there. You're faced with an 8 by 8 problem, whether it's a Sudoku variant, a logic puzzle, a visual challenge, or even just trying to arrange something efficiently in that space. You start counting, you start visualizing, and then your brain just kind of melts. You get lost in the sea of squares. You feel like you're missing something obvious, something fundamental, and you probably are. See, the truth about the 8 by 8 isn't some single mystical trick. It's not a cheat code you can punch in and suddenly become a master. It's more like a collection of tools, perspectives, and strategies that, when combined, make that 8 by 8 grid a whole lot less intimidating. It's about understanding the inherent properties of that space and how to leverage them to your advantage. Now, before we dive into the nitty-gritty, let's just acknowledge the sheer power of the number 64. It's a perfect square, 82. It's also a power of 226. These properties alone open doors to a lot of interesting possibilities. Think binary, think spatial partitioning, think symmetry. 64 is a number that lends itself to structure and organization. So where do we start? 1. Divide and conquer. The first and probably most crucial trick is to stop thinking of the 8 by 8 as one monolithic block. Break it down. Divide it into smaller, more manageable chunks. Think of it like a map. You wouldn't try to memorize an entire city at once, would you? You'd break it down into neighborhoods, streets, landmarks. The most obvious division is into 4 by 4 squares. This is incredibly powerful. Why? Because 4 times 4 is a significantly easier space to deal with. It's smaller, it's more intuitive, and you're less likely to get lost. You can focus on solving each 4 by 4 section individually, and then piece them together. But don't stop there. You can also divide it into 2 by 2 squares, which gives you 16 distinct units. Or you can think in terms of rows and columns. Each row or column is an 8-unit linear space, which again, is easier to manage than the entire grid. 2. Pattern recognition. The 8 by 8 grid is a breeding ground for patterns. And recognizing these patterns is key to unlocking its secrets. Look for symmetries, repetitions, sequences, and relationships. Symmetry. Is there a line of symmetry, either horizontal, vertical, or diagonal? If so, you can use that to simplify your analysis. What happens on one side of the line is mirrored on the other. Repetitions. Are there repeating elements or patterns within the grid? If so, you can use that to predict what might happen in other areas. Sequences. Are there sequences of numbers, colors, or shapes? If so, you can use that to extrapolate and fill in missing information. Relationships. How do the elements in the grid relate to each other? Are they connected by lines, colors, or logical rules? Understanding these relationships is crucial for solving many 8 by 8 puzzles. 3. Visual chunking. Sometimes the best way to tackle an 8 by 8 grid is to ignore the individual squares altogether and focus on larger visual chunks. Look for shapes, clusters, and areas of concentration. This is especially useful for visual puzzles and spatial reasoning challenges. For example, imagine you're trying to fit a set of Tetris-like pieces into an 8 by 8 grid. Instead of focusing on each individual square, try to see how the pieces fit together as larger shapes. Look for areas where the pieces naturally interlock, and use that to guide your placement. 4. Logical deduction. Many 8 by 8 puzzles rely on logical deduction. Use the information you have to eliminate possibilities and narrow down the options. This is especially true for Sudoku variants and logic grids. Process of elimination. If you know that a certain element cannot be in a certain square, eliminate it as a possibility. Constraints. Identify the constraints and rules of the puzzle. Use these constraints to guide your deductions. If-then statements. Use if-then statements to explore logical possibilities. For example, if this square is filled, then that square must be empty. 5. The power of visualization. Visualization is a powerful tool for working with 8 by 8 grids. Try to visualize the grid in your mind's eye. Imagine moving elements around, filling in gaps, and testing different possibilities. Mental rotation. Practice rotating the grid in your mind. This can help you see patterns and relationships that you might otherwise miss. Layering. Imagine the grid as a series of layers. This can help you understand how different elements interact with each other. Animation. Try to animate the grid in your mind. Imagine elements moving and changing over time. 6. The iterative approach. Don't be afraid to experiment. Try different approaches, test different possibilities, and learn from your mistakes. The 8 by 8 grid is a space for exploration and discovery. Trial and error. Sometimes the best way to solve a puzzle is to simply try different things and see what works. Backtracking. If you make a mistake, don't be afraid to backtrack and try a different approach. Refinement. As you gain experience, you'll develop your own strategies and techniques for working with 8 by 8 grids. 7. Knowing your tools. Depending on the type of 8 by 8 you are working with, certain tools are useful. For example, for Sudoku, pencil marks are essential. For a visual puzzle, software might be useful to manipulate shapes. Pencil marks. For Sudoku and other logic puzzles, use pencil marks to track possible values. Software. For visual puzzles and spatial reasoning challenges, use software to manipulate shapes and explore different possibilities. Grid paper. Simply drawing the 8 by 8 grid on paper can be extremely helpful. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.